Hello, everyone. I'm Reese.
And I'm Kelsey.
And you're listening to Charismatic Megafauna.
Reese.
Yeah, what's up?
What'd you learn this week?
Well, I learned about something called the Monticello Dam.
Dam?
Dam. So, the Monticello Dam is a concrete arch dam in Napa Valley.
Do they grow grapes on it?
Probably. I didn't look into that part. I just assume that grapes grow everywhere in Napa Valley.
Yep.
It impounds Puta Creek.
Okay. Don't love that, but...
Pause for laughter. And it creates Lake Berryessa, which is one of the largest man-made lakes in the world, I think.
Okay.
It's huge. It's a big lake.
A lot of water.
But here's why I picked it, Kelsey.
I'm ready.
Because the dam's most notable feature is a large spillway known as the Glory Hole.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yep. It's as magical as it sounds. It's 72 feet in diameter at the lake level, which is up at the top of the dam.
Okay. Makes sense.
And it shrinks down to approximately 28 feet at the exit.
Okay. So it's like cone-shaped.
Sort of, yeah. Yeah, basically.
Okay.
But it's huge.
Right.
It's very long, and it's also curved, of course, because it's a drain, basically. It's a drain pipe.
All right.
It can drain, this is insane to me, it can drain 48,400 cubic feet per second.
You wouldn't want to be caught in that.
You wouldn't. Swimming, believe it or not, is prohibited in this lake. And because I think it was in the 90s, sometimes somebody got sucked down the drain and they died. Obviously. Where else is that going to go? So you can't swim in. Although, you know what? I don't know if this is true or not, but I did hear a story about a duck that got sucked down the hole and lived. Like it just popped out the other side. Now that I'm telling it, I find it very hard to believe that that's actually true.
I believe it. Ducks are so pliable.
And they're very buoyant, I suppose. Yeah.
And they can fly. So, like, once it's getting shot out of the hole, as long as it can survive all that pressure, might be fine.
That would be my where I would be tentative about the duck living through that is the water pressure.
Yeah.
But you never know.
Could happen.
I choose to believe it.
Yes. I'm team duck.
Yeah. So this occurred, it doesn't do this all the time, but when the lake gets to a certain water level, the purpose of the spillway is to drain it to keep the lake at a reasonable, manageable level.
That makes sense.
Right. And this occurred most recently on February 26th, 2019.
Oh, so just a couple months ago.
Just a couple months ago, yeah. And there's a lot of drone footage. There are quite a few pictures, including the ones that I'm going to show you right now.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous.
Isn't it?
It's literally a drain.
Yeah.
It is as if you stuck a drain in the middle of a lake.
Right. It's the weirdest looking thing. Of course, we're going to attach this, but it's just like somebody unplugged a lake. And it's now just starting to drain. Like I said, we'll post pictures because it's the goofiest looking thing.
Man, you're not wrong.
Yeah. Pretty great, right?
Wow. Not how I thought this podcast would be starting.
No.
But I'm not mad about it.
I know. Me neither. So anyway, the Glory Hole.
So first of all, happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride Month.
It is the month of June. And this month, we're going to be dedicating all of our episodes to at least some LGBTQ discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very excited about it.
Yeah.
I love Pride Month. One of my favorite times of the year.
It's a wonderful time.
So let's just get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. What do you have?
Today, we're going to talk about the existence of gay animals.
Sure.
So I'm basing as much as I can on scientific observations, but there are some also just observed phenomena that we're going to talk about. And the definition I'm going to use is same-sex sexual activity, courtship, affection, pair bonding, and parenting. So any observable case of any of those things.
Okay. I assume you're going to define those terms.
Yeah, we'll talk about them.
Okay.
But any animals that have exhibited any of those things, or in some cases all of those things, are going to be gay animals. Now, it has been observed, gay animals have been observed on every major continent, through every major animal grouping, through over 450 species worldwide, including humans. So we're not going to talk about every species that exhibits homosexual behavior, but we are going to talk about some of my favorites.
Okay.
Now, just as a disclaimer, I'm going to use the word homosexual to refer to these species, which is not correct for humans. However, I don't want to overly anthropomorphize the behavior of these animals because we don't know their motives.
It would be considered a more insensitive but biological sort of term to
Right.
use. It sounds like it's what you're saying.
Right. And like I said, I don't want to overstate their behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I will probably slip and refer to them using more socially human language,
Sure.
but I'm going to try and use relatively scientific language.
Yeah. We are, after all, a very official science podcast. So
We are.
integrity is first and foremost.
Unless this is your first time listening to this podcast, you know that is not true. Anyways, in a lot of cases, many of these animals would be, according to current social understandings, bisexual. But I'm going to be more forthright with the specifics as we discuss each individual species. Like I said, I'm going to base most of this on research. In many of these groups, same-sex pairings have significant differences in their sex hormones, meaning testosterone and things like that are highly variable between animals exhibiting same-sex pairings and animals exhibiting opposite-sex pairings, which suggests that there is some sort of scientific or genetic basis to their pairings.
Okay. I'm a little curious. I think maybe I see where you're going with this, but I'm going to wait it out just to make sure.
We might not talk about what you think we're going to talk about.
Okay.
But go ahead.
If that's the case, I'm very disappointed, but that's okay. That's okay.
But essentially, there has been verifiable scientific evidence that shows in certain animals there is a difference between same-sex pairings and opposite-sex pairings.
Genetically.
Or at least in the expression of genetics, as in having higher levels of testosterone or higher levels of female hormones. They're different.
Sure.
Now, research has been not super widely available, probably due to observer bias and social attitudes towards these same-sex behaviors, which I always like to say, just gals being pals. So, for example, it could also be more insidious, which stinks because, like I said, the social attitudes were different historically towards LGBTQ people and especially towards those attitudes.
How do you mean insidious?
I mean insidious in the way that if you were to try to study this behavior in animals, or if you referred to it explicitly in scientific papers, you might lose your funding. If you suggest that this behavior is natural, you might be accused of pushing an agenda or even just face more intense scrutiny than other researchers might due to the controversial, and I mean controversial in quotations, due to the controversial nature of these studies.
Sure.
So in some studies, I like to think about giraffes, where 9 out of 10 sexual pairings in giraffes are male-male. So researchers have observed this, but they refer to any sexual relation between a male and a female as intercourse, even though some of those things are literally just sniffing. Like if a male sniffs a female, that's considered either a precursor to or actual intercourse in a lot of studies. Whereas male intercourse, so male-male pairings resulting in orgasm of one or both of the male giraffes, is classified as a dominance or competition display, which I think really highlights how our culture views sex.
It's just bros being bros.
Just
Kels.
bros being bros. I literally wrote in parentheses after that note, just guys being bros.
Yep. Just being bros.
Just helping my buddy to orgasm.
It's not gay, Kels. It's not gay. It's just bros.
Just bros. Really good bros. But like I was saying, that really highlights as a culture our view of sex and our historical view of sex, which is it's an exercise in dominance, not an expression of love. So there's been a lot of problems with the scientific observation of same-sex behaviors in animals, specifically historically.
Because they're discarded or disqualified as displays of dominance.
Or they just aren't reported on at all because of, again,
Right.
the controversial nature of homosexuality in animals.
There's no room in science for controversy, Kels.
You'd hope so. However, science is controversy.
Yeah. We don't want any new radical ideas. We're very comfortable with the scientific information we already have.
Right. So, like I was saying, due to our culture's complicated views of same-sex pairings, which doesn't even mention gender identities, other identities, multiple pairings, things like that, research on this subject is rare and highly contested in a lot of ways. But with all of that being said, today's point is just talking about some wonderfully, beautifully gay animals. Let's jump into it. The first one I want to talk about is just a little shout out to domestic rams. So sheep in captivity, up to 10% of male sheep form strictly male-male bonds. They refuse to mate with females, and they basically just have a wonderful life. Two big male rams
Sure.
hanging out.
Yeah.
Just lovely.
Right.
But I didn't want to really focus on that one because a lot of people, when you talk about domesticated animals, people talk about how, well, we've changed their behavior and it isn't natural. There's a lot of people who could say, well, that's just because they've been domesticated for so long. It's because we keep them on farms.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest we're going to talk about are wild animals
Okay.
for the most part. So black swans are another one,
Right.
which adds a layer to the Natalie Portman movie,
I was going to say, is it Natalie Portman?
isn't it?
Yeah. And what's her face from
Mila
that 70s?
Kunis.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
It adds a layer, for sure.
Yeah.
25% of pairings, of black swan pairings, are male. Are male-male pairings.
Wow. 25%?
25%. They either, so not only are they pairings, they are also parents. So they either steal nests or they will seduce a female and then scare her away from the nest to raise the cygnets on their own. So a cygnet is a baby goose or a baby swan. A baby goose is a gosling. Now, this is super interesting to me because these will form long-term pairings. They'll mate almost for life, and throughout their lives, they will raise many cygnets. They also interact in a lot of ways as male-female pairings would. So there's what scientists call premarital rituals, so mating rituals and displays for a partner, reciprocal preening, which is exactly what it sounds like. They preen each other.
Sure.
And nest guarding. All of that's exhibited by both male-male pairings and male-female pairings. And my favorite part, more of their babies survive to adulthood. So male-male pairings produce more competitive cygnets that are more likely to survive to adulthood than male-female pairings.
Interesting.
Not trying to push an agenda, but I love that. Go gay swans.
Yeah, they're doing it right.
Wonderful. Now, birds in general display a lot of same-sex pairings and multiple, like, for example, with ducks, multiple partners raising nests. So we're going to talk about a couple of different types of birds. The next one I want to talk about is penguins.
Sure.
We've all seen that Parks and Rec episode
Yeah.
where Leslie marries the gay penguins. Turns out that's based in quite a bit of fact.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's when you brought this episode up, that was the first thing to pop in my head. And then I realized that was almost the entirety of my understanding of this of gay animals.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we're talking about it. So that's not my only frame of reference. Although it's not going to go away.
Oh, no.
That'll always be there.
And I'm about to cement it in your brain.
Good.
There are multiple reports of male-male couplings of penguins at zoos. Not just one species, a variety of species form male-male companionships. So male-male couples build nests together. A lot of times they'll try and incubate in a rock as if it were an egg. In some zoos, male-male pairings are given an egg that they can raise. Specifically, there were 2 penguins at a New York zoo who were given an egg to raise. They're the relatively famous, I think they're chinstrap penguins. They're the relatively famous gay penguin couple.
They have names, don't they?
Yeah, I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. But they were given an egg that they successfully raised. They also completely ignored the women, the female penguins, I should say, and really just had a great time. Just guys being bros.
Yeah, just being bros. They were good friends, girls.
Yeah. They also, in a variety, so not these 2 chinstrap penguins, but other penguins in captivity, are observed to adopt a lot of eggs that have been abandoned by females.
Okay.
So this is absolutely anthropomorphizing, but I just see this beautiful little gay penguin couple going around and adopting all of the abandoned eggs. Happy Feet would be a very different movie.
Yeah.
It'd be better.
Yeah.
Maybe not as poignant, maybe more poignant. But the thought of these little penguins wandering around, adopting all of these beautiful little penguin babies that have been abandoned is so gorgeous.
Yeah, that's a nice sentiment.
Now, to dispel the idea that this just happens in zoos, it's also been extensively observed in the wild, again, through multiple species, where males will bond and they build nests and they adopt abandoned eggs and they live out their lives together as they're being observed to be doing in captivity as well.
These same animals that you were referring to earlier in zoos?
Yeah, penguins. Mm. So the next one, a big favorite, walruses.
Really?
Side note, walruses have a baculum, which is a penis bone, and they're real long. Like 2 feet.
Whoa.
Unrelated to the topic at hand, but wild.
That is wild.
Anyways, walruses don't reach sexual maturity until they're about 4 years old, which obviously for humans doesn't seem like that long, but for certain animals it is a pretty long time.
What's a walrus's lifespan?
It's a great question. It's about 40 years.
Okay.
So they live 10% of their life and then become sexually mature.
Sure.
Now, up until they turn 4, they are exclusively gay. They form intimate partnerships with other males. They travel in groups of males only. But it is a exclusively male society up until they turn 4.
Okay.
Once they reach that sexual maturity, they are bisexual. So they'll mate with females during the breeding season, but for the rest of the year, they have sex with males. And again, form these really tight-knit male communities.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it seems to me as if the mating season occurs, they protect the females, they protect the pups, and then as soon as they're done, they're back to living their bachelor lifestyle. Fabulous.
Yeah.
I love it. Creative solutions to continue your species, but live your life the way that you'd like to live it.
Surprisingly interesting for an animal like a walrus, too.
Well, right, because walruses are viewed as these big dominant creatures with these big masculine males and protecting their females, but...
Because of the mustache.
Right, because of the mustache. But in reality, it's just a bunch of males hanging out, having a good time.
Okay.
Something that I found really interesting as I was doing my research is there isn't a lot of talks about lesbian animals, which, again, I think comes back to a cultural thing where we tend to observe the males of the species. We tend to apply reasoning and try to reason through their behaviors, whereas close female partnerships are most likely viewed as maternal relationships or young raising relationships when they might have other motives that scientists just aren't willing to unpack.
Sure.
There are some on this list as we continue to go forth. We'll talk more about this.
Okay.
In fact, let's talk about elephants.
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 All right.
So African and Asian elephants alike participate in same-sex bonding through notable affectionate interactions. So what I mean by that is they kiss, they entwine their trunks, they spend a lot of time placing trunks in each other's mouth and caressing each other. Very intimate behaviors. Male elephants frequently also live apart from the herd, and in these tribes where they are separated from the herd, they form long-lasting companionships with other male elephants. Typically, it's an older elephant who takes a couple of younger male elephants under his wing, under his ears, if we're thinking in Dumbo terms.
Dumbo terms, yeah.
But he takes them in, and they have very close, intimate relationships. They frequently exhibit sexual behaviors towards one another. They're very closely bonded. In addition to this, females also form very close relationships with other females. And it consists of similar behavior where they're very gentle. There's a lot of caressing, a lot of the trunk intertwining, things that indicate that they're very close. They're very intimate.
Yeah.
Now, that's something I think for female elephants that hasn't been looked into a lot because elephants are believed to have a matriarchal society where the females pair up and they help each other raise young, and it's viewed evolutionarily as an advantage that just exists, whereas I think we could scrutinize it a little bit more and see it as a choice. They've decided to form female-only cohorts where it's just a female-only society raising their babies. And then on the flip side of that, there is male-only society where the males are spending all of their time together. Now, what I found really interesting is a lot of this intimate behavior seen in male-male pairings and in female-female pairings isn't observed in male-female pairings. So that suggests that male-female pairings are less intimate and possibly only exist for procreation.
Yeah, similar to the dynamic that the walruses have.
Right. Which is really interesting because these are all animals that are believed to have very social structures. They have larger portions of their brain that deal with social interactions, which theoretically could mean they have higher empathy, they have higher understanding of fellow animals' opinions. No, that's not what it is. But they have a better understanding of how animals are interacting and why they're doing the things that they're doing.
Yeah.
Even more so maybe than humans. Think about whales, which are such intensely social bonded groups. And it's possible that they express their emotions and their group pairings in different ways than humans. Mm-hmm. Even though humans are social animals, it's possible that these animals have more empathy than us and more love and support.
I mean, it's a sliding scale anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of primates, we're going to talk about bonobos next.
Yeah.
Bonobos are wonderful on this list because they are fully bisexual and polyamorous. So both males and females engage in same and opposite sex behavior, ranging from really intimate sensual behavior to full-on sex. Around 60% of all sexual activity occurs between two or more females, which I found really interesting.
What was the percentage on that?
60%.
It's most of it.
Yeah, of any sexual interaction is between 2 or more females. This is the highest frequency of same-sex pairings across all primates. However, all great apes exhibit homosexuality. Every single great ape that we have observed exhibits some level of same-sex pairing. But with the bonobos, it's very love everyone, sometimes all at once. It's a very sexually driven society.
Sure.
But yeah, bonobos, other great apes, there's a lot of same-sex pairings. And a lot of it, like I said, has been viewed as dominance displays or de-escalation techniques, which is interesting. If it's male-male sexual behavior, it's viewed as dominance. If it's female-female sexual behavior, it's viewed as fight de-escalation.
Sorry,
even though
what?
it's the same behavior.
Fight de-escalation?
Yeah. So they believe that 2 females participating in sexual activities with one another is to calm tensions in the group. Seems like reaching to me.
They're just friends.
Just gals being pals.
They're good friends, gals.
Now, the next one I want to talk about, like I said, I love all of these for their own individual way. Every single animal I read about, which is not all the animals I'm including in today's podcast, but every animal that I read about is amazing. They all exhibit some really awesome behavior. There are some that I didn't touch on because the reasoning was a little flimsy.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I was hoping that you were going to touch on the frogs.
The frogs.
Yeah. You know how...
I know you're about to talk about Jurassic Park.
No, not that. You're talking about where they would like change their sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Talking about how the Democrats put something in the water to turn the frogs gay.
I can't do this with you right now. The frogs were gay all along. No, that actually kind of leads us into our next species. It hasn't been observed a lot in amphibians and reptiles. I think because people aren't doing that kind of research with amphibians and reptiles yet, but they are starting to.
Okay.
And among my favorites are the whiptail lizards.
Okay. I don't know what that is.
Whiptail lizards is a grouping of lizards. I forget how many species are in there. But there are several species of whiptail lizard that are female only. There are no males in that society.
Okay, this is going back to the Jurassic Park thing.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah.
So these lizards reproduce through parthenogenesis, which is basically just asexual reproduction. But instead of it being like a sponge that buds, just pieces break off of them and become clones.
Sure.
Instead, they actually go through the entire process of gestation and forming an egg and then incubation. It is as if they were impregnated. However, no males ever enter the picture. That does not mean that no sex occurs, though. So in this society, they have sex with other female lizards, and in response to that, their bodies produced fertilized eggs. So I was reading a little bit into this, and I don't understand it fully, so I'm not going to talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
But my understanding of it was females who are receptive, they're at that point in their cycle where they could produce eggs, have sex with females who are not in that point in their cycle, and it stimulates this egg development in the fertile females. And then same kind of thing. They'll go through periods where they're less receptive, and in that less receptive period, they're having sex with the female lizards that are closer.
Right.
That are closer to producing eggs.
Interesting.
Yeah. I could probably do an entire episode on whiptail lizards.
Yeah.
And discuss the intricacies of their female-only societies.
It'd be cool to revisit that at some point.
It would. Sounds like a blast, honestly. It reminds me of, and I'm sure you and I have talked about this before, but I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast. There was a group of monkeys, I don't remember what type of monkey it was, where the males of the group ate a bunch of poison fruit and they died. So the females were left to raise all of the babies.
Wait, all of the males died?
Mm-hmm. Which, a little bit poetic in a way. All these, because it was a primate species known for having hyperaggression in the males. The males ate a bunch of poison fruit and then they died.
Sure.
And the females remained, obviously. They raised all of these monkeys, all of the baby monkeys, including some males. And when they grew up, everybody was peaceful. The males did not exhibit overt aggression. Everything was calm. And if that isn't just a good idea in our current society, I don't know what is.
So was it getting rid of like this certain gene that was perpetuating this behavior, or was it just like how they were raised?
No, it was a social thing. It was how they were raised.
Interesting.
So the aggressive males died off and the new males were taught to be tolerant and were not rewarded for aggressive behavior. And so they grew up and they were not aggressive.
Amazing how that works.
Yeah. Again, I say, maybe an idea.
Yeah, we could use some of that.
But it's really cool. There's a lot of examples of stuff like that in nature where males are hyper aggressive, or there's same-sex pairings that are accepted within the social hierarchy of these species, and then humans come in and say it's unnatural and we shouldn't accept it, or they try to explain away what it actually is, which is sort of what we're doing here. And that isn't my intention, but I think that it's important to try and look at it from an unbiased view.
Yeah. Well, and it's difficult too. It seems like it's difficult, A, because I don't know much about it at all, and B, because it seems like a lot of this stuff is behavioral. And since you can't really interview the animals, a lot of it is observation, which sort of has that that aspect of like it's debatable. It's always going to be debatable because it's based on somebody's perspective.
Right, and it's so, the biases are so likely.
Mm-hmm.
Your personal feelings towards same-sex pairings, be it positive or negative. I do have one more grouping that I want to talk about.
Yeah, okay.
And I saved it for last because it's my favorite.
Is it humans?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's bats.
Oh, yeah.
So there are more than 20 species of bats that have been observed engaging in same-sex behaviors of various degrees. Bone-in flying foxes participate in group fellatio between strictly males.
Oh, my.
So a lot of times they'll couple off, they'll participate in fellatio. Most of the times it's reciprocal, so like polite bats.
Sure.
Love it. This occurs multiple times also in the same pair or couple. So it's less a big group orgy and more these bats are pairing off and participating in sexual activities with one another. This is also a species that has not been viewed to partake in social grooming. So a lot of bat species do partake in social grooming, and part of social grooming is also sexual gratification. I didn't talk about those species because that's more, again, of a polyamory situation where just everybody is partaking in this group orgy. Mm-hmm. But in this species, they are just pairing off. And researchers believe that it is strictly sexual in nature because there isn't this social grooming observed otherwise. Now, like I said, there are so many species that exhibit behaviors like this. There's a lot of male-male, female-female mounting displays that have been viewed historically as dominance displays, but could easily be something else. There isn't a lot of understanding of the social dynamics of bats, but it isn't as if there's one dominant male and the females all bow to him. It isn't a harem situation. So there could be all kinds of motives that we just don't know for why the bats behave this way.
Absolutely.
And this comes into account, I mean, there's many other species, not just of bats, many other species worldwide that engage in this sexual mounting between same-sex pairings. But because it isn't super exclusive, I figured I wouldn't include it. Again, just to reiterate, I don't want to anthropomorphize this behavior more than more than is necessary to describe it. But at the same time, there are a lot of gay animals out there.
Yeah, well, I think if you're viewing it in the context that we're sort of discussing it, it's sort of, in the debate over this, it's become sort of this arguing point against gay behaviors in like human culture.
It's been used to debase gay behavior.
Yeah, so it's been an argument against gay behavior and culture in human beings. So because it has been used in that way, it's not a completely separate and objective thing. It's something that you should view in terms of like scientific integrity, but also it does sort of apply because it's been used as that argument.
Right. And in the same way, this belief that same-sex pairings are the result of dominance displays or are the result of other weird social dynamics that in animals has been used to continue to debase LGBT people throughout history.
Yeah.
I think that we can look at animals participating in same-sex pairings, especially animals where they've paired together for life, they're mating for life, and they're raising young, and they're participating in this bonding and social grooming and a lot of reciprocal behaviors. You can point to that and say, this is natural. This does occur. It has always existed in human society, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not unnatural.
It also seems like a little bit of a yardstick for how our society is accepting gay people.
I would agree with that.
Like, depending on how much acceptance and understanding there is there, we're more willing to observe that sort of thing in nature, too.
I think this, in the past couple of years, is the first time scientists can really focus on observing same-sex coupling in animals. Because like I said before, they were at risk of losing their funding. They were at risk of being seen as pushing an agenda, which is always my favorite, because what is the agenda? Is it love? Is it acceptance? Is it something else? I don't understand what it even could be.
Yeah. Is it one of those little spiral notebooks that's got the Monday through Friday?
9 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Yep.
But it's bizarre that we as humans have decided that it is an unnatural behavior, even though it is clearly incredibly natural, both in humans and in animals.
Yeah.
Not to mention plants.
Well, that's for another time, I think.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. It's just bros being bros.
Gals being pals.
All right, so speaking of controversial scientific topics that defy convention, we're going to talk about space-time.
Space-time?
Yes. Not so controversial anymore, but when it was thought up initially, pretty crazy stuff. Yeah.
Lay it on me.
So before we get started, I do have to give a short disclaimer here. This is a very, very complicated topic. I am by no means an expert, as we've said many times before. So this is going to be a gross oversimplification of space-time, but I just wanted to hit a couple of the really important bullet points to give everyone kind of a base understanding of it. Very base understanding. I cannot stress that enough.
I know nothing about space-time other than it's space and time.
Yeah. All you need to know is that it's awesome.
I'm not so sure I agree with that, but it is awesome.
It's awesome and it's freaky. So space-time is any mathematical model that fuses the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time into a single 4-dimensional continuum.
I thought 4th dimension was smell. We're off to a bad start.
Yeah. So space-time And it is a very complicated thing, but fundamentally, it's not that complicated. It's
Okay.
basically taking the 3 dimensions of space and just adding time to it.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, so if you think of like on a graph, finding a point in 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions or whatever, it works pretty much the same way. It's just a little less concrete. It's more of an abstract concept because time isn't a spatial direction.
Right.
And
Time is linear.
well, we'll get to that later. So space is pretty simple, right? It consists of 3 dimensions, and a dimension is just the minimum coordinates that are needed to locate a point, like I said. So on a graph, you're trying to locate a point. It's in space somewhere. You can point it out. And all you don't need any more than 3 dimensions to do that in the physical world.
Right. We exist in space.
We exist in space. This is very easy for most people to grasp, right? Time is a little harder. So time is classically defined basically as a progression of events. Things happen in an order. Most people think that's pretty simple. The thing where it gets kind of confusing is the rate at which time progresses. So I really like the physics definition. There's like a commonly held physics definition of time just as what a clock reads, which I think is hilarious.
It is hilarious because what if 2 clocks read different times?
Well, they frequently will, and that's kind of what we'll get into. But it's basically just like, what time is it? Well, what does the clock say?
It's the dad response.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This points to it being defined by its measurement. Time depends on the instrument that you're using to measure it and where that is.
Which our understanding of time only exists in relation to what we're using to measure it.
Exactly. Which is part of what makes this whole thing kind of freaky.
Yeah. Maybe time doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just hurtling through space.
Sort of space-time. It's also dependent on the observer, where the observer is in space-time, relative to other observers and a gravitational force. We'll get into that later, though.
Is that the theory of relativity?
I'm getting there.
Sorry.
All right, so time is basically the 4th dimension.
Not smell.
Not smell, right. This is important to know. Kelsey will argue that it is smell. That is, in fact, incorrect. It's time.
Maybe it's both.
I think it depends on your perspective. I think that's what we're learning here. So this came up because a guy named Albert Einstein. Are you familiar with this guy?
Yeah, I think Britney Spears helped him pick up his books.
What?
That's a deep cut meme.
Okay, I'll Google it later. So Albert Einstein, when he was working at the patent office in Bern, Switzerland, he conducted a series of, I think he probably was bored, so he sat there thinking. but we'll say it as he conducted a series of thought experiments.
Ah, yes.
And these thought experiments led to a variety of different conclusions about the nature of light and the connection between time and space. So the first major thing that was a theory that he developed was special relativity, which you mentioned earlier.
I don't understand what it is. I have a general understanding of what it is.
So it's basically, the simple version is it's Einstein's theory regarding the relationship between space and time.
Right.
That's the big thing. It was put forth, he published a paper on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. And that's where he lays it all out. I'm going to link that as well on the webpage.
This is the idea that if somebody were in a spacecraft, time would move differently from them. So if...
That, not quite.
Okay.
That comes later. But this is the paper that gave us stuff like mass energy equivalence.
Okay. So the basics.
Kind of the basic, the fundamental building blocks of quantum mechanics and later general relativity. So mass energy equivalence, people are probably familiar with, even if you don't know it by name. It's anything having mass has an equivalent amount of energy and vice versa. The better known way to notate this is E equals mc squared.
Which is energy equals mass times
acceleration.
C
is the speed of light.
Right.
This also introduces a pretty important concept to space-time called time dilation, which is the difference in elapsed time measured by two different observers. So that's somebody in space-time in a certain location in space-time, and somebody in another location in space-time will there will be a different amount of time elapsed.
So that's sort of what I was saying earlier. Somebody in a spacecraft will experience time differently than somebody on Earth.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that's partly because of this. And something that Einstein came up with this thing to explain it. I think it was Einstein that came up with this. This is all built on a bunch of different people's theories and mathematical equations and stuff like that. But it's this thing called the space-time interval, also known as the invariant interval. And it's basically an equation that it accounts for the difference between elapsed time and spatial distance. And the conclusion that you reach is the relationship or the difference in each of those, like depending on which observer you're talking about, the change or the difference relationship, however you want to put it, that is the constant.
Okay.
The distance will change, the elapsed time will change, but the change will not change. The relationship doesn't change. Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
So this kind of leads us to viewing time in terms of causality or cause and effect. Time and events occur in a certain order.
They logistically have to.
Logistically, right. This has become more of the focus because if you get caught up in elapsed time and spatial distance, there's going to be a lot of inconsistency depending on where people are in space-time, whereas we can pretty much always agree that if something happens and it causes something else, the cause has to come first and the effect has to come second. That's kind of the universal thing here, whether they're happening at different rates or at different places.
Right. Which lends credence to the fact that time travel will probably never be possible.
Yes, sort of. So,
in this basic way.
Right. In special relativity, pretty much everything has to go in a certain order. As far as my understanding, in special relativity, you can't travel backwards in time.
But you could potentially travel forwards.
Kinda. Theoretically, you can, yeah.
Right.
Because you can, if you travel closer to the speed of light, like the closer to the speed of light that you're traveling, presumably the further distance that you could travel and all that. It's crazy.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What would traveling at the speed of light do to the human body physically?
I don't know.
Would we just be smooshed to a pancake?
Yeah, nothing good, I don't think.
Cool.
That might be something to revisit down the road. That's more of a in-depth. We're just hitting sort of the highlights.
Cool. Highlight reel. Got it.
Right. That brings us to general relativity. So this is Einstein's view of gravity in the context of space-time.
I have a friend who works on gravity.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we all work on gravity because we live on Earth. But
right.
No, he works on a team that measures gravitational waves.
Oh, right.
Shout out, Ben Sandine.
Cool.
Good guy.
Doing God's work. So this is, previous to this, there was Newton's view of gravity, right? Which is every physical object has a force, and it's an attractive force where the object is drawn to another object, or two objects are drawn towards each other.
Right. With the larger object exhibiting more force on the smaller.
Right. The problem with this is it couldn't explain certain effects relating to planetary orbits. There were little anomalies that Newton couldn't explain, and this is basically where he just gave up and he's like, must be divine intervention.
Classic Newton.
I know. Einstein's view was that gravity is the result of objects or mass warping spacetime. So you view spacetime more as a fabric that things move through rather than random objects just being pulled towards each other. There's sort of a curvature to it, and there's a shape and a landscape where things will move along, and it's not static. Like it's not totally unaffected. There's not this really rigid system. It's an event in space-time happening away from a gravitational source, like a planet, will behave differently than if it is near a gravitational source, because that gravitational source changes space-time.
Is that where gravitational waves come into effect?
So that's more of you're asking kind of the detailed stuff.
Okay.
But possibly. I think that's more of a detailed principle.
And you're not an astrophysicist?
No. And I can Google it, but like it wasn't super relevant. It didn't seem like, again, that could be totally wrong. So the last thing that to get to in general relativity is gravitational time dilation. If you remember, time dilation is just the difference in elapsed time measured by two observers. This is the same thing except in relation to a gravitational source. So this says basically, say you have two clocks that are measuring time. The farther the clock is from the source of gravity, the faster time passes.
Okay. So again, in space, you could be gone 5 minutes. It would feel like 5 minutes to you, but it would actually be 5 minutes and 2 seconds on Earth.
Yeah. Well,
that's not to scale, I'm sure.
Well, no. Let me think.
Because the further you get from the source of gravity,
the faster time passes. So it would be like by the time, if you're in a spaceship, how I'm reading this might be wrong, but how I'm reading this is if you're in a spaceship outside the Earth, if it's 5 seconds, you would only get to like 3 seconds or 4 seconds on Earth because it moves slower closer to the gravitational source.
Right, okay.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Right.
So this is why and this is something I want to revisit at a later point, but this is why objects like black holes and planetary orbits are so crazy, because it's not, I think we think in terms of like a really static kind of plane and everything moves according to a rigid set of rules, but it's not like that. Things are interacting with each other. It changes the rules a little bit, especially if you get a good amount of gravity involved.
I don't like it.
I know, it's freaky to think about, right?
I want everything to exist on a 1x1 square plane.
You like the rules are good. Rules help control the fun.
They control the fun. No, this is insanely interesting, though. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to wrap your head around, and this was just an intro, which is why I am not an astrophysicist.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to consider how differently we can experience things versus how differently other beings, maybe on other planets, maybe people in the future as they explore space, how differently things are going to pass or how differently time will pass.
Yeah. You even think in terms of like somebody wearing a watch on ground level and somebody wearing a watch on a plane.
Yeah.
They're going to be very, very minute differences, but time is going to pass at different rates.
So if I bore to the middle of the Earth, I can live slightly longer.
No, you'd probably die right away.
Ignoring the fact that the center of the Earth is molten.
Sure, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, slightly longer.
Or I would experience time.
So I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that if, like, obviously presuming there's no molten lava there, that if you fall, like, say you cut a hole into the center of the Earth, you fall down.
Jules Verne style.
Right. And like you jump down it, you would fall down, and this isn't accounting for the rotation of the Earth, because if the Earth is rotating, you'd hit the wall.
Right.
But if you were to fall down, you would eventually slow down until you got to the center.
Right.
And then you would start falling back out of the hole, and your speed would, I think, decrease if you got towards the outside in this theory, and you would just basically like pop out of the hole and land on the ground.
In my eyes, and this is obviously not real because I don't have a great grasp of this, and you couldn't do it, but the way I would understand it is you would get stuck in the middle of the Earth because you're being sucked to the center.
Well, that was my thought too, but that's sort of viewing it through like the Newtonian lens, where it's like you're being attracted to the center of this object.
Right.
Where that's not the case necessarily, is it's not like an attractive force. It's you're moving like through this sort of ambiguous space-time.
I still think that the differences in space-time would be minute from the center of the Earth to the middle of the Earth, that it would function more like Newtonian physics.
It definitely could.
I want to get stuck in the middle of the Earth.
I don't think you do.
Eh.
Anyway, that pretty much wraps it up. That's,
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the building blocks for how we view the universe.
Poorly, in my case.
Yeah, mine too.
So in honor of Reese beginning to build a D&D character, it's time for some uplifting news.
I'm ready.
Reese pulled out the blue die, which is our humanitarian dice. So let me know. You roll that D20 and let me know what you get.
All right. I got an 18.
An 18. Okay. So the name of this is Reddit Twin Towers in my notes. But I'm pulling up what it actually is. So this is uplifting, but very brief. It is a Reddit post about a man who is a 9/11 survivor. He was in the concourse when the first plane hit. He was carried out by a police officer and survived because that officer got him out of the building, got him into an ambulance, and got him out of there. 2 days later, that officer's body was found in the wreckage. The uplifting part of this story is that the guy who was saved by this police officer put the officer's 2 children through college anonymously and still keeps up with them through media to see how they're doing. And thanks to putting them through school, was able to create 2 relatively functional human beings who didn't have to worry about college debt. Which isn't to say that they are better off having experienced the loss of their father.
No.
But is something that I wanted to include because it reminds us that there are still good people out there doing good things.
Yeah.
And I wanted to include that. Shout out to good people.
That's really nice.
With that to take you forward, I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Reese.
And this was Charismatic Megafauna.